I jumped into marriage with a man who is a university professor, 29 years old, and holds a doctorate. He's rich, good-looking, and has an outstanding job. What's more, he owns an expensive car and a fancy house, and he's not burdened by parents. My mom said that a catch like him is worth marrying for. I was momentarily blinded by his charm and, after just half a month of dating, we signed the marriage certificate. But now, just half a month later, I was filled with regret. He was too distant, and the gap between us felt immense. We barely had a conversation. He goes to bed early, rises early, and leaves for work early. I, on the other hand, stay up late, sleep in, and go out at night. On the day we got our marriage license, I was on my period, and he willingly slept in the guest room. After 2 weeks of marriage, it felt more like we were just living together as roommates. I didn't want to keep living this lonely life. After much deliberation, I decided to talk to Derek about divorce. As I approached his office door, a young female student knocked and stepped in ahead of me. "What's the point of closing the door? Just open it," I heard Derek's voice, tinged with annoyance. The young girl opened the door, looking a bit pitiful, and I stood there, unsure of what to do. "Susan, I suggest you come back another day unless it's really urgent," she said with a sigh, trying to be helpful. I stood there, feeling a mix of curiosity and surprise. "Professor Derek, have you had a chance to look at my paper? I need your signature in the last section." Inside the office, Derek was wearing a black shirt that showcased his tall, athletic build, with the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, revealing his well-defined wrist. As he flipped through a paper, his brows knitted together in increasing frustration. I asked for a draft, not a rough draft. The title is decent, but beyond that, I can't make heads or tails of it. I stood there, completely at a loss. In the half-month since we got married, Derek and I had barely exchanged words, and he was naturally a man of few words. He looked so refined and cultured. I never expected him to be so sharp-tongued. He continued turning the pages, his expression darkening further. "What is this format? Did you create it yourself? Can you imagine how I feel reading this? It feels like your mind is completely blank. What exactly are you researching? Remove my name from the acknowledgements, don't put me in a moral bind. Do you even want to graduate?" The young girl stood there, nearly in tears. Poor Susan. It was hard not to empathize with her plight. And to my surprise, this normally reticent man was suddenly so vocal. With a cold expression, he slammed the paper down on the desk and looked up, our eyes colliding unexpectedly. He seemed momentarily surprised. "Sonny, what brings you here?" He composed himself, walked up to me, and took my hand. "Why didn't you come in?" The young girl seemed to see me as her savior, her eyes brimming with curiosity. I awkwardly raised my hand in a little wave. Derek glanced at her and introduced me. "This is my wife, Sunny." She immediately turned into a curious gossip. "Hi there. Wow, teacher, you're married. Your wife looks really young. When did you get married?" Derek frowned, reminding her, "If you put as much energy into studying as you do into gossiping, your paper wouldn't read like a gossip magazine." "Sorry to bother you, teacher, I'll just head out now." With that, she left, and we were left alone in the office. We exchanged glances, feeling a bit awkward. "What brings you here today?" He looked at me, his tone softening slightly. I was unsure of his mood and hesitated, feeling like now wasn't the right time to talk about divorce. I was just passing through. I made up a little excuse. He smiled faintly, reaching out to ruffle my hair. "Perfect timing, then. Let's go home." Derek was tall and striking, with sharp features and a pair of gold-rimmed glasses that gave him a rather stoic presence. His smile and gentle touch made me waver. With a face like that, the thought of divorce felt like I'd be losing out. He took my hand as we walked out of the office, running into a few colleagues on their way home. He nodded politely, smiling as he introduced me. This is my wife. We just got our marriage certificate. We'll make sure to invite everyone to the wedding. I felt my cheeks flush as I climbed into the car with him. The drive back home was quiet. As someone who talks a lot, I couldn't take the silence any longer and decided to break the awkwardness. Hey, why are you so tough on your students? He sighed, they're just too slow. But when you helped me with my paper back then, you weren't this harsh. Derek was a student of my dad's. Though we didn't see each other often, his name was well known in academic circles. He was a genius who had skipped grades, a brilliant scholar working on both his master's and doctorate, a true standout. My dad had many successful students throughout his career, but at home, he ended up with a disappointment because of me. I had always been the underachiever. I attended a bottom-tier university for my undergrad, failed the entrance exams for grad school, and ended up abroad for an easy master's program. When my dad read my thesis back then, he nearly had a heart attack from the stress and reluctantly sent me to Derek for help. Back then, he patiently revised my work, word by word. Now, as a professor, he had completely changed. He suddenly smiled, his voice deepening, "You're different." As we spoke, he pulled over in front of a pharmacy. "Just a moment, I need to grab something," he said. I was curious, "Are you feeling sick?" Was he so upset with his students that he needed some blood pressure medication? He didn't answer, just glanced at me with an unreadable expression. He got out of the car and returned shortly. But I didn't see anything he had purchased. The quiet continued as we made our way home, and once inside, he headed straight to the kitchen to start cooking. I must admit, Derek's habit of cooking is quite nice. Even though I often sleep in late, there are always fresh meals ready in the fridge. He's a decent cook, and soon, several dishes were beautifully arranged on the table. There was red wine braised beef, pasta, and a fresh salad. These were all my favorite dishes. I dove into the meal, while he kept serving me more pasta. "That's enough." I was starting to feel full, and he finally stopped. "Okay." Once again, silence enveloped us. I sighed internally, we really had no common ground. I couldn't go on living like this. After we finished eating, he silently cleared the table while I went to the bathroom to wash up. In the shower, I spent a long time trying to figure out how to bring up the topic of divorce. The steam clouded my thoughts, and my brain felt a bit lightheaded. As I reached for the towel, I slipped on the wet floor and fell with a heavy thud. I cried out in pain, tears streaming down my face. It felt like my bones were shattering. "Sonny, what's wrong?" Derek's anxious voice rang out from outside the door, knocking urgently. I was in so much pain that I struggled to respond clearly. "Sonny, are you okay?" "I'm coming in." Realizing I was still naked, I panicked and tried to say through gritted teeth, "I slipped, don't," but before I could finish my sentence, he opened the door and walked in. Our eyes met, and I could see his face turn crimson, all the way to his neck. My cheeks flushed, and I didn't know where to hide. "Derek, you." He quickly realized he had barged in, cleared his throat, and hastily wrapped me in a towel, lifting me into the bedroom. He gently set me down on the bed, concern etched on his face. "Where did you hurt?" I clutched the towel tightly, my face burning red. "My foot." As my eyes fell to my foot, I felt so embarrassed I wanted to crawl into a hole. I must have slipped too hard because my slipper was stuck tight around my ankle. Derek clearly found it amusing, but stifled a laugh. "I must have bought them too big. I'll get you a better pair tomorrow," he explained. He then placed his hand on my slipper. "Let's get these off first." So, we both pulled and tugged, engaged in a little battle over the slipper. I was nervous and embarrassed, struggling for what felt like ages, but the slipper refused to budge. "It's too tight." He sighed helplessly, guiding me. "Sonny, relax. Keep your foot straight." Oh my gosh, this was so awkward. A few minutes later, after several attempts, we finally managed to get it off. Derek half squatted in front of me, gently rubbing my foot. Can you move it? Strands of hair fell across his forehead, and the lenses of his glasses obscured his slightly lowered gaze. I blushed and wiggled my foot. It's fine now. The pain had been intense when I first fell. But it was much better now. As he gently massaged my foot, he gradually lifted his head, and our eyes locked. I felt flustered and awkward again. Especially since he wasn't saying anything, the atmosphere was indescribably strange. Unable to bear it any longer, I took a deep breath and cautiously spoke. Derek, how about we get a divorce? His hand froze, and his expression darkened. Sonny, what did you just say? I avoided his gaze. I said, divorce. He stood up, casting a shadow over me with his cold demeanor. He shut his eyes for a moment, but the anger underneath was still evident. Sonny, do you think our marriage is a joke? I fidgeted with my fingers, feeling a bit guilty, but we clearly aren't compatible. Where exactly are we not compatible? Everywhere. We don't feel like a couple at all. He stood in silence, turned, and walked away. I was left momentarily stunned. Before I could process it, he returned. Then he tossed a box onto the bed. Derek, what are you doing? His shirt had disappeared, and just glancing up made my face flush even more. His voice was hoarse. If we don't try, how will we know if it's not right for us? The frames of his glasses brushed against my nose. The warmth of my skin meeting the coolness of the metal. He quickly removed his glasses, and as my gaze fell on Derek's handsome features, I realized that without the glasses, he seemed a bit softer. Trying it out felt worthwhile. He was quite the catch. But 3 minutes later, I lay on the bed, questioning my choices. What a whirlwind of activity, and the result was zero. Was this really it? Someone was covering their eyes. Feeling a bit awkward. Baby, it's my first time. I forced a faint smile to comfort him, trying to maintain some semblance of dignity. Inside, I felt like I was losing it, thinking, so we tried, and now what? Do you really think this is suitable? Divorce was necessary. I was a capable girl, I deserved better than this. His face had a bit of a flush. Can we try again? Whatever you want. After all, if I just held on a little longer, it would eventually pass. The phone on the bedside rang at an incredibly inconvenient moment. It was my mom calling. Sonny, your dad has fainted. Her voice was filled with urgency, and we didn't have time to feel awkward. We hurried to get dressed and rushed downstairs to the car. The streets were empty at night, and Derek drove quickly. I was so worried I could barely sit still. It was my first time experiencing something like this. And I had no idea what was happening with my dad. The fear made tears spill from my eyes. Derek drove with one hand while holding my hand with the other. Sonny, don't be scared. Dad will be okay. He's always fine during checkups, so don't frighten yourself. We raced to the hospital, and when I saw my dad, he was already awake, which finally allowed me to breathe a sigh of relief. Dad, you scared me to death. I wrapped my arms around him. Still shaken. It was just a high blood pressure episode, you know, your mom always making a big deal out of everything. It's late, and she called you two over. He patted my shoulder, trying to comfort me. My mom was right beside me, doing her best to reassure me. It's all right now, the doctor said he can be observed overnight. Your dad doesn't want to stay here, so we'll head back soon. She then turned to Derek. You have class tomorrow, right? You should take Sonny back home so you both can rest. Before Derek could respond, I jumped in. Mom, I want to go home with you. Why would you want to go home with us at this hour? I want to go to your house. To be honest, I was worried about my dad, and I wasn't sure how to face Derek when we got back. I still felt a bit awkward. In the end, it was Derek who stepped in to help me out. Mom, Sonny is really worried about Dad. She was terrified on the way here. Let her stay with you. I'll come to pick her up after work tomorrow. Alright, then Sonny can see Derek off. I'll stay here with your dad. My mom nodded and gave me a quick instruction, no need. Derek replied politely, reaching out to pat my head, just call me if you need anything. My dad was fine and went to bed as soon as we got home. The next day, I slept in until late morning. I was jolted awake by my mom's voice, Sonny, do you really sleep until this time every day at home? I yawned and glanced at my phone. Mom, it's only 10 o'clock. I usually sleep until noon. What on earth are you doing all day? I explained, I just have lunch, play some games, binge watch some dramas in the afternoon, and then I go out to hang out with Lily at night. Lily is my best friend, and after graduating, she opened a small bar. Having just returned to my country after 2 lonely years abroad, I desperately needed to make up for lost time with some partying. Lily is gorgeous and knows how to have a good time, so I basically spent every day with her. So you're out partying every day? My mom couldn't help but scold me, have you ever seen a married woman who goes to bars every single day? Mom, I'm just trying to relax a bit. Does your husband mind you out partying all the time? She asked pointedly. Well, he's fine with it. Mainly because he gets off work around 4 or 5, and I usually head out around that time, so we hardly ever cross paths. How's your relationship? I felt a bit guilty and stammered, it's okay. Sonny, marriage takes work too, you can't just take advantage of his good temper and do whatever you want. Seeing my mom gearing up to lecture me, I quickly hugged her like she was a plush toy. My beautiful mom, what are we having for lunch? My mom sighed and gently pushed me away. Ask your dad, I can't cook. My mom is like a princess at home, pampered by my dad. Even in her 50s, she still doesn't lift a finger to help around the house. I lazily got out of bed, and my dad was already busy in the kitchen. I grabbed a cooked shrimp and was met with a disapproving look from him. Greedy cat, wash your hands before you eat, he said. Dad, why are you making breakfast so early? He continued his work in a calm and orderly manner. I'll have it ready soon, you can take it to Derek's school. I raised an eyebrow. But doesn't his school have a cafeteria? Can cafeteria food compare to home-cooked meals? This kid lost his parents young, he longs for family. You need to pay more attention to him. Got it. Why are you and Mom both defending him today? Seems like you're quite pleased with this son-in-law, huh? As I said this, I kept sneaking bites. My dad puffed up with pride. Of course. I've been watching him for years, I trust him to take care of you. He's handsome, well-educated, and has a good temperament. The best part is, he has no parents. So you won't have to deal with in-laws. Isn't he a million times better than your previous boyfriends? I was at a loss for words. It's true, I'd had a few short-lived romances. My exes either cheated on me or ended up marrying someone else. Eventually, I lost faith in my ability to pick men. I was a bit of a mama's girl and daddy's girl, so I let my parents choose for me. Just a few days after returning home, they set me up on a blind date with Derek. Honestly, I didn't know him very well, I only knew he was an orphan and that my dad invited him over for New Year's dinner every year. He had helped me with a paper back during graduation. He had this cold demeanor, like an unreachable flower that could only be admired from afar. I've always liked guys who could make me laugh, and he was 5 years older than me. Under my parents' relentless pressure, I agreed to meet him. On our blind date, he wore a dark gray suit with a subtle pattern, paired with gold-rimmed glasses. His physique and presence instantly caught my attention. At that time, my parents were enthusiastically praising him in front of me. This is my most outstanding student. He skipped 2 grades in high school and completed both his master's and doctorate. Before 30, he became a senior lecturer at a top university and is about to be promoted to associate professor. What a catch, being with him is like hitting the jackpot. I have to admit, I was a bit swept away by their excitement. In the end, I just chaotically signed the marriage certificate. I didn't even consider whether we were truly compatible or why such a desirable man was still single. Dad, if Derek is so outstanding, why has he been single for so long? I couldn't help but ask. He's poor, he didn't have much income while studying. After graduation, he focused on research and had no time for romance. I was speechless. Is it possible he has some kind of problem? What kind of problem could he have? He's your husband, don't you know him? My dad paused and suddenly looked at me. Does Derek have problems? No, I was just saying it casually. Dad. Don't you think Derek is a bit quiet? My dad shook his head in exasperation. What good is a man who only talks sweetly? That just fools girls like you. Alright, you're right. You've been back for quite a while, you've had your fun, right? Now that you're married, you can't just keep running around. Find a less demanding job, you don't need to earn a lot, your dad can support you. Sure thing, Professor Damon. Don't worry about me. In the end, I reluctantly made my way to Derek's school with the meals my parents had packed for me. He was still in the middle of a public lecture. Curious to see what he looked like up at the podium, I snuck in through the back door of the classroom. Fortunately, there was an empty seat in the back row, so I quietly sat down. At the front, Derek was explaining a problem. His blackboard filled with formulas in a language I couldn't decipher. He was deeply focused, his glasses catching the light, and his expression was calm, giving off a scholarly vibe. You're not from our department, are you? A girl next to me whispered. I awkwardly nodded. Did you come here just to see Professor Derek? He's quite the celebrity, a lot of girls come just to admire him. I frowned. Derek is that popular? Definitely. He's a legend at our school, he's the dream guy for many. She pointed discreetly toward the front. See that girl? That's Emily from our department. I heard she knew the professor before and often bothers him for no reason. I glanced over and noticed a fair-skinned girl intently focused on Derek at the podium. I hadn't realized Derek was such a catch. We all idolize Professor Derek, but that girl has clearly got ulterior motives. A lot of us don't think highly of her. The girl continued her gossip. So many girls have tried to get close to him, but he never flirts. His dedication to academics is part of why we admire him so much. But I heard he recently got married. I wonder which lucky girl got our god. Just then, a cool voice broke through the chatter. Student in the back who's talking, can you answer this question? Instantly, everyone turned to look at me. I quickly lowered my head and buried it on my desk. The girl next to me stood up nervously, utilizing the F.X. 2/3 advancement theory. I proved the application process of linear fluids in practice. Alright, thank you. Now your classmate will elaborate. Feeling awkward, I lowered my head even more, unsure of what to say. I kept pretending to be invisible. The girl poked me gently. The professor is calling you. The one lying down. I gritted my teeth and stood up, my face burning with embarrassment. I don't know. Laughter erupted around the room. I glared at Derek, wondering if he was doing this on purpose. He glanced at me with a momentary surprise, then a smile crept onto his face. Come to my office after class. The girl beside me sighed, looking at me sympathetically. Girl, we'll mourn for you. What a disaster. I pulled out my phone and messaged Derek. Was that on purpose? Just walk back yourself after class, I'll sneak away. I didn't want his students to find out that his wife was a total klutz. He glanced at his phone, smiling faintly. I got a "Don't be angry" sticker in response. 10 minutes later, the class bell rang. I quietly slipped into Derek's office. As soon as I stepped in, he took my hand, looking a little wronged as he explained. I didn't know it was you, I swear it wasn't on purpose. I huffed and placed the thermos on his desk. Repaying kindness with malice. I jerked my hand away from him in frustration. I brought you lunch, and you went out of your way to embarrass me. I turned my back to him, and he looked at me, clearly at a loss. He silently reached for my hand again. Please don't be mad. Honestly, he didn't even know how to apologize. Just then, we heard a knock on the door. There was a partition in his office separating a resting area, so I quickly stepped behind it. After the door opened, I heard Derek say, "Leave it open." Through the gap in the partition, I caught sight of the girl from class earlier, the one Emily had pointed out. "Derek, this is wild honey from my hometown. My mom asked me to bring it for you." The girl carefully set the honey on the table, her voice soft and sweet. "Thank your mom for me. Sunny will probably enjoy this too." Derek's expression remained composed as he reminded her, "From now on, at school, it's Professor for me." Emily looked a bit flustered. "Okay, Professor Derek." After a long pause, she quietly added, "A new restaurant opened near the school, and I've heard it's pretty good." Derek raised an eyebrow slightly. "Really?" "I'll have to take Sunny there sometime to check it out." I wasn't sure if it was because I was standing nearby, but Derek's tone seemed to signal clear boundaries. In the end, Emily left with a hint of disappointment on her face. "My mom and her mom were good friends back in the day, now she's my student," Derek explained first. "Oh." I shot him a glance as he set out the food my dad had made. "Well, you must be pretty close." Then he picked up some vegetables for me and replied, "Not really that familiar." "Why do you always have your students keep the office door open?" I asked. "Male teachers and female students have to avoid any misunderstandings. Being one of the younger teachers, I have to be extra cautious." Suddenly, I remembered what that girl had said in class today. There were many girls who showed interest in him, but Derek never got involved with any of them. Honestly, despite his awkwardness, his character was quite commendable. But he finishes everything on the bed in 3 minutes. But he's really good looking. Ugh, I'm back to being indecisive. After we finished eating, he automatically started cleaning up. "Sunny, I have another class this afternoon. Can you stick around and wait for me?" "Why should I wait for you?" "Now that we've been married for a while, we should have a serious conversation." "Okay." We had rushed into marriage and hadn't communicated much, so it was definitely time to discuss our issues. While Derek was in class, I lounged on the sofa in his resting area and started scrolling through my phone. It wasn't long before I heard a knock on the office door. Assuming it was someone looking for him, I ignored it, thinking they'd leave when they realized he wasn't there. But to my surprise, the door swung open. Curious, I stepped out of the resting area to see who it was. It was Emily, holding a cup of coffee. She looked taken aback. "You?" I shot her a look, not hiding my annoyance. "I'm Derek's wife." "Do your students just waltz into their teacher's office like this?" My instincts told me this girl wasn't as innocent as she appeared. "Professor Derek is my brother." She bit her lip, clearly upset. I brought Derek a cup of coffee. "Derek? It seems you've forgotten that he just told you to call him professor at school." I couldn't help but scoff. Emily raised her head, indignation on her face. "We've known each other since we were kids. He's always looked out for me. You married him because your dad is his teacher. When your mom got sick years ago, your dad lent him money, and that's the real reason he married you out of gratitude." She wore a defiant expression, laced with a hint of mockery. "Derek prefers people who are just as exceptional as he is. His ex-girlfriend was a PhD from Yale and is now a renowned scientist. I've heard you're just an ordinary college graduate. How could Derek possibly be interested in someone with such an empty head? Your marriage won't last long." I couldn't understand where she got the audacity to say such things to me. Derek had clearly stated that he wasn't close to her. My anger ignited instantly, and I felt a surge of energy to argue back. "I may be an ordinary college graduate with limited experience, but I had no idea that someone like you, from a prestigious university, could fill your head with such lowly ideas. As Derek's legal wife, who do you think you are to come at me like this? You aren't even worthy of being a mistress. What gives you the right?" She clenched her fists, trembling with rage. He doesn't even like you. I couldn't help but let out a derisive laugh. He doesn't like me, he likes you. You might not have a mirror, but surely you can see the truth. Take a good look and know what kind of person you are. If Derek really liked someone like you, it would only mean I overestimated him. Fury surged within me, and I let it all out. I may lack education and refinement, but when I get angry, I'm not afraid to throw a punch. After all, I'm Derek's wife. Just imagine what people would think if I beat you up today. Emily's bravado crumbled under my words, leaving her stunned. In the end, she stammered and couldn't think of a reply, scurrying away in defeat. I sat there, fuming more and more with every passing moment. Feeling restless, I needed to vent, so I took a taxi straight to my best friend's place. To my surprise, after just 2 days apart, she had already gotten herself a new boyfriend behind my back. He was the captain of the university football team, cute and wild, the epitome of a young stud. The two of them were all over each other, and it made me grit my teeth. She came over, beaming, to show off. This boyfriend is so clingy. Then she leaned in to whisper, his energy is off the charts, it's a bit much for me. I could only grind my teeth in frustration. By the way, how's it going with your flash marriage husband? She shot me a mischievous grin. I clenched my teeth, sighed, and held up 3 fingers. Oh my God, he can't be like that. He looks so fit. I waved my hand dismissively, all looks, no substance. I thought I could stick it out. But today at his school, I ran into this Emily who openly challenged me. I ranted to my best friend about everything that happened. What does she see in him? His age, his icy demeanor, or the 3 minutes? I slammed my hand on the table in frustration. I'm definitely done with him. I want a young stud too. My friend nudged me teasingly. Well, my baby is coming over with his classmates today. Want to join us? Absolutely, let me just take a look. The younger guys were the best. Hearing them call me gorgeous made my heart swell with joy. After a few drinks, my mood soared even higher. But before I knew it, a tall figure loomed in front of me. Looking serious. Sonny, why didn't you answer my calls? I didn't see them. Why didn't you wait for me? I just didn't want to wait. His gaze flickered slightly as he politely nodded at my friend and the others. Sorry, I'm taking Sonny home. Maybe it was his intimidating presence, or perhaps they were reminded of the fear of being called out by a teacher. The group of them acted like timid quail, smiling and nodding obediently. Goodbye, Professor Derek. Then, to my surprise, Derek bent down, scooped me up, and deposited me into the car. We sped home, and once inside, he helped me change my shoes. I noticed that without my realizing it, he had swapped my shoes for a smaller pair. I wasn't drunk, just a bit tipsy at most. He helped me settle onto the sofa, looking as if he was holding back his frustration. Sonny, we're married. If something's bothering you, you need to tell me. I felt a surge of annoyance and pushed him away. I want divorce. I'm into young studs now, I like younger guys. His expression turned icy. What did you say? Younger guys are sweet and attentive, and they've got stamina. Jealous, are you? Can't deny you're getting old. His gaze darkened further. Young guys are full of energy, while older men are weak. Derek gripped my shoulders firmly, his eyes locked onto mine. Sonny, are you trying to drive me insane? I stood my ground, rising up on the sofa with my hands on my hips. Who's driving who insane here, Derek? You said you weren't close to that Emily. If you weren't close, why did she just waltz into your office? Why did she bring you coffee and try to get cozy? He seemed momentarily taken aback. You've misunderstood. Misunderstood? Your student told me when she first met me that you two were childhood sweethearts and had a great relationship. Sonny, no. You made fun of how empty-headed I am and that I'm not good enough for you. You married me because my dad helped you. That's not true. Derek, my dad spent ages cooking that meal for you, and I kindly brought it over, only to encounter some toad sticking to my foot. It doesn't bite. But it's still revolting. Do you really think I'd be in a good mood after that? I kept speaking, getting angrier with each sentence, not giving him a chance to interrupt. He seemed anxious, clearly unsure of how to handle the situation. Finally, he just wrapped his arms around me tightly, holding me close. "Derek, let me go." He was so strong that being in his embrace made it hard for me to catch my breath. "Sonny, it's not what you think." I looked down at myself, feeling a bit wronged. My relationship with Emily wasn't that close. I'm quite a bit older than her. I started school early. When my mom was sick, her mom helped us out a bit. After that, she got into my school, and her mom asked me to look out for her. I don't know when she started thinking like that. She never told me. Since she's a girl, it's hard for me to say anything directly. So I've been deliberately trying to keep my distance from her. Sonny, I've never had any feelings for her. Besides, she's my student. I would never violate professional ethics or be unfaithful to my marriage. You can rest assured about that. You should trust me just like I trust you. Even if you go out to have fun. I know you wouldn't cross any lines. His words caught me off guard. And the only reason I married you is that I like you. He stared directly at me, his tone both firm and gentle. It hit me right in the heart. I felt a mix of surprise and something indescribable. My earlier defiance suddenly fizzled out. You like me? Why didn't you go after me back then?" He looked at me with a helpless sigh. "I'm quite a bit older than you, and honestly, you probably wouldn't want to date someone as boring as me. I don't really know how to navigate relationships. Being with me must be pretty dull, right?" I cleared my throat and admitted, "It's not that boring, it's just that you don't talk much." He ruffled my hair and said, "Sonny, I'm not very good at comforting people. Could you teach me how?" My heart softened a little, and I couldn't help but respond with a playful huff. Girls are easy to please. When they're upset, a kiss and a hug will do the trick. Just as I finished speaking, he suddenly took off his glasses, pulled me close, and kissed me. I was taken by surprise, and by the time I realized what was happening, my cheeks were already burning. His lips were soft, alternating between gentle and fervent, making it hard for me to resist him. "Sonny, please don't be angry anymore, okay?" I took a breath to steady myself, gripping the hem of his shirt and giving him a pointed glare. "Isn't this pretty good?" He smirked, teasingly replying, "All thanks to the teacher." I silently rolled my eyes. The old man was learning quickly. As we were talking, Derek's phone rang, displaying a call from Emily. I shot him an annoyed look, and he looked a bit sheepish. I urged him to answer, curious about what mischief Emily was up to now. Derek picked up, and on the other end, I heard a pitiful sob. "Derek, I'm sick." Derek frowned and snapped, "If you're sick, go to the hospital. I'm not a doctor." Then he hung up. I feigned a teasing tone, "But she's sick. Aren't you going to show some concern?" He tossed the phone onto the sofa. "I have other matters to attend to." His voice held a hint of desire. Looking at his strikingly handsome face, I found it hard to say no. The bedroom was bathed in a warm, soft glow from the wall lamp, mingling with the moonlight from outside. I couldn't hold back any longer and finally blurted, "Derek, did you take Viagra or something?" A glint of amusement flashed in his eyes, his usual calm long gone. "Sonny, do you really think younger guys have more stamina than me?" I didn't mean it. I was just talking nonsense. "Derek, you're not old at all." Derek didn't let me get a wink of sleep the entire night. And all I could think was, he's definitely not aloof and dignified man, wild and shameless is more like it. The next morning, I woke up in Derek's arms. It should have been a sweet moment, but I was sprawled over his chest, disheveled and drooling. "You're awake?" His voice was a little raspy. Embarrassed, I quickly wiped my mouth. He brushed a strand of messy hair away from my face, his gaze soft and tender. Does it still hurt? My face heated up, and I bit him lightly. Shut up. Aren't you usually up early? I asked, still half asleep. It was already mid-morning. And he was still lying here with me. His arm tightened around my waist. It's more comfortable sleeping with my wife. Blushing, I buried my face against him, wondering how he'd suddenly unlocked this sweet-talking side. I gave him a playful kick and demanded, my back's sore. Give me a massage. Of course. Leaning into his embrace, I caught his natural scent, no cologne, just his own body scent. Something I couldn't describe but found incredibly comforting. I quietly reached out, and somehow, things went off track. In the end, wrapped in a blanket, I ended up sitting on the carpet, watching him move around the room, my mind still a little foggy. He tidied up the bed, lifted me back onto it. Then picked up our clothes from the floor and took them to the bathroom. I couldn't help but marvel, who knew he'd have such stamina for an older guy? By the time I got dressed and walked out, he'd already washed everything and was busy in the kitchen. On the balcony, freshly washed clothes and even a few intimate items hung to dry. Still dripping slightly. There was an unmistakable intimacy to it all. I felt a little dazed. How did we go from distant to this close in just one night? In the kitchen, he was focused on chopping vegetables while a pot of soup simmered on the stove. Then, his phone rang, and I heard his voice, tense with irritation, coming from the kitchen. Curious, I followed the sound. So just because you're a top student from a prestigious school, that gives you the right to look down on people? Talking behind someone's back, where's your sense of decency? She's my wife. You should be calling her teacher's wife or sister-in-law, not disrespecting her like that. Where's your manners? I married Sunny because I love her. Her father's a distinguished professor, she's younger than me, and I'm just a guy with a humble background. If anything, I'm the one who's lucky to have her. Chasing after a married teacher and trying to meddle in someone else's relationship, don't you feel ashamed? You don't owe me an apology. The ones you owe an apology to are your parents and everything they taught you. I stood there, listening to each of Derek's words, feeling a mix of surprise and warmth. Dad had once told me that Derek was mild-mannered, principled, and someone I could truly rely on. Only now did I fully understand that this man had his values firmly in place. Thinking about how I'd acted yesterday, I suddenly felt a bit foolish. Quietly, I walked up behind him, slipped my arms around his waist, and nuzzled my head against his back. Derek, was I being a little over the top yesterday? If there's a misunderstanding, I should just talk it through with you. Instead, I ran off and tried to annoy you. He turned around, wrapped his arms around my waist, and looked down at me with a soft smile. No, I'm the one who didn't give you enough security. Derek, what do you even like about me? He lowered his gaze, a gentle warmth softening his expression. When I was in school, my professor often talked about his daughter, saying she was his little angel, so sweet and kind. Sometimes, when students stayed after class to ask questions, he'd keep checking his watch, eager to go home and make dinner for his wife and daughter. Growing up, I didn't know what a happy family looked like. My dad cheated, and my mom divorced him when I was young. So I always felt this deep envy, wondering what that kind of family must be like. A bit after I started grad school, my mom was diagnosed with kidney failure. The stress was too much. So I told my professor I wanted to quit. Instead, he gave me money, told me to focus on my studies, and not worry about it. Unfortunately, my mom still didn't make it. Do you remember the first time I came to your house? He asked. I remembered. One year during the New Year's holiday, Dad had invited one of his students over for dinner. He'd told me this older guy was coming and that he'd just lost his mother. So he was going through a rough time. I remember him then. He was thin, polite, but hardly spoke. At 16 or 17, I had no idea how to comfort someone. So, in the end, I awkwardly handed him a piece of my favorite candy and said, "Here, have some candy. It'll make you feel better. He took it and politely thanked me. After that, Dad invited him over for New Year's dinner every year. We hardly spoke, most of the time. He and Dad would talk about academic stuff. The last time I saw him was when he came over to help with my thesis. I had just started dating someone then, and my head was completely elsewhere, barely focused on my studies. Derek, don't tell me you've liked me all this time. I was just a kid back then, that's kind of creepy. I poked his waist teasingly. He gave a helpless smile. I wouldn't say that. I just felt your family was so warm. I envied that. He gently pinched my cheek. Little angel, thank you for the candy. I don't know why, but seeing you always made me feel better. But I guess someone as boring as me isn't really your type, huh? I wrapped my arms around his waist, a wide smile on my face. Yeah. I didn't think you were my type before. But now, I think I'm starting to like it. I lifted my arms around his neck. Hey, Derek, why didn't we get together sooner? Then we could have dated for a few years before getting married. He held me close, his gaze soft and warm as he looked down at me. Guess we'll just have to date after the wedding, then. He looked at me, took off his glasses, and leaned down to kiss me. Your soup's about to burn. I murmured. Let it burn, just a little longer. The whole room was filled with the dizzying, cheesy sweetness of love. Marrying first and falling in love after it was unexpectedly addictive. On a rare day off, Derek took me to the amusement park. I never would have guessed that this man had a bit of a fear of heights. We were only on a simple swing ride, and he was already pale, breaking out in a cold sweat. You're scared of a little swing? Professor Derek, you're such a scaredy cat, I teased, though I grabbed a tissue to gently wipe his forehead. When I was little, my dad used to bring me to places like this. Amusement parks were like a fairy tale for every kid. Were you one of those kids who could only ride the carousel? He managed a faint smile. I actually didn't go to amusement parks as a kid. My mom raised me alone, working every day to make ends meet. We couldn't really afford things like that. I was surprised. I'd grown up without a care in the world, but his story was so different. What was I thinking, teasing him like that? Now, I just felt awful. So, what did you do for fun when you were little? I used to love studying, especially solving advanced math problems. That's a bit unusual. How could anyone like math problems? He chuckled. Our house was filled with trophies and certificates. My mom's favorite thing was polishing them all. At the mention of his mother, his eyes grew a little dimmer. Sadly, she never got the chance to meet you. A wave of bittersweet sadness washed over me. I couldn't truly understand his life experience, couldn't fully empathize, but hearing him say these things, I realized just how lucky I'd been. For him to have achieved all he has. He must have worked so much harder than most people. Looking at his face, I felt a twinge of compassion. Derek, have you felt lonely all these years, going through everything by yourself? He gave me a gentle smile and ruffled my hair. I got used to it. For a moment, I couldn't find the right words to comfort him, so I silently wrapped my arms around his waist, meeting his gaze, warm and filled with love. I reached up, smoothly took off his glasses, and leaned in for a soft kiss. Here's a hug and kiss, full of love. I'd meant it to be a light kiss, but he held me firmly, taking charge and deepening it. Above us, fireworks burst across the night sky over the amusement park castle. As the world spun around us, I felt like fireworks were going off in my mind too. Sonny, thank you, he whispered in my ear. With the gentle night breeze and sparkling lights. I quietly slipped the cat ear headband off my head. Derek, if you really want to thank me, put this on, will you? I'm dying to see how it'd look. The thought of those sparkly cat ears on the usually composed Professor Derek, I couldn't help but imagine it. He frowned and immediately shook his head. That's something for you girls to wear. Who says that? Look, There's a guy wearing them over there. And it's adorable. I pointed toward a couple nearby. No way. He looked less than thrilled. Oh, just put them on for a second, I promise I'll take them off right away. I gave him my best puppy dog eyes, but he wouldn't budge. Nope. Apparently, someone has an image to uphold. Ignoring him, I went on tiptoe, aiming to put the cat ears on him myself. To my surprise, he actually sidestepped quickly to avoid me. Professor Derek, don't be so shy. I chased after him, weaving through the crowd. In the bustling amusement park, I accidentally ran straight into someone, quickly apologizing, I'm so sorry. Derek turned around as soon as he heard me. Derek? The woman I bumped into was sophisticated looking, and when she saw Derek, her eyes widened slightly in surprise. After a brief pause, she glanced at me and then smiled politely. Is this your girlfriend? Derek walked over, took my hand, and replied with a smile, yes, she's my wife. She looked momentarily taken aback. Congratulations. Then, with a polite smile, she looked back at him and asked, have you thought any more about that proposal I mentioned? Derek's expression remained calm as he replied smoothly, thank you, but I've decided not to pursue it. Their brief conversation was polite. Yet something in my gut told me there was more to their history than they let on. I couldn't hold back. Who is she? Derek cleared his throat. My ex-girlfriend. I felt an instant wave of annoyance. Sonny, don't get the wrong idea. This was all a long time ago. He awkwardly held my hand, trying to explain, but I just huffed and pulled away. Oh, so many years later, and you're still in touch? And she's asking you to consider something? Consider what? You're married now. He quickly hugged me, his hands gently holding me close. She's married too, with a 3-year-old. He explained softly, she only reached out because she recently came back to the country. She wants me to join her research team, it's not what you think. Are you going to go? I've heard overseas research pays a lot more. Back in the day, my dad had gotten plenty of high-paying offers abroad. But he'd turned them down without a second thought. Derek shook his head, his gaze steady, I have you now, and your parents. I'm staying here with you. Just a few words, and I had no comeback. So, she's the famous Yale PhD everyone's talked about? I couldn't help my curiosity. First loves are supposed to be unforgettable, right? Derek gently squeezed my hand, saying, we didn't date for long. She ended things before graduation and left to study abroad. She stayed there after that. I had a sudden realization. Oh, so you got dumped? Don't you feel any regret? I pressed. He looked at me and replied seriously, I was young and broke. She made a clear-headed choice, that's all. No regrets. So, what did you two do on dates? I couldn't resist asking. We'd read, discuss academic stuff. And? Before I could keep going, he pulled me into his arms. Being with her wasn't like being with you. I huffed. How is it different? With her, it was like we were partners, two people who admired each other. With you, we're lovers. We're married. His low voice sent a shiver through me. It's a feeling I can't hold back. A feeling he can't hold back, huh? Derek, you're getting smoother by the day. Have you been practicing on the side? I teased, tugging his shirt. This man was getting better at this. He chuckled, slightly embarrassed. I looked some things up online. I smirked, raising an eyebrow. Have you been browsing those other sites? Is that why you're improving so fast? He looked a little uncomfortable, but he wouldn't admit it. Oh, Professor Derek, who knew you had a hidden playful side? I seized the opportunity to tease him. I thought you were always cool and reserved. Secretly browsing little sites. Professor Derek, what were you thinking about while watching? When words failed him, he found another way to silence me. You, he murmured, voice low and rough. I shot him a blushing glare, breathless, and decided to let him off the hook. Pulling me closer, he gazed at me, his eyes steady and warm. Sonny, what I can promise you is a lifetime of loyalty to our marriage and to you. I can give you a life without worries, one that's steady and simple. I'm going to do my best to treat you well, to be a good husband, and make sure you never regret marrying me. Just a few simple words, and I felt my heart melting. I hugged him, grinning. Derek, my mom always used to tell me that I should marry someone like my dad. And now, I've found him. Later that night, he was busy in the kitchen, while I changed into cozy clothes and curled up on the sofa with my phone. The lights were warm, the room spotless, and the whole space radiated a cozy, homey warmth. In that moment, I realized that love didn't need grand gestures or passionate promises. This quiet, steady presence without betrayal, without doubt was enough. In the small, everyday moments, there was a gentle glow. After dinner, he sat with me to watch some TV, and I snuggled into his arms. A few minutes later, I looked up at him, my expression serious. Starting today, I'm going to buckle down, find a job, and prove myself. He burst out laughing, lifting me onto his lap. Sonny, would you like working at the university? They have positions for faculty spouses, mostly administrative roles. If you're interested, it's worth considering. But, if we end up working together, you might get tired of seeing me all day long. He explained earnestly, then added, or if there's something else you're passionate about, go for it. I'll be here to support you. At that moment, an idea flashed through my mind, I'm going to have a job. My eyes lit up. Could I be the dorm supervisor in the boys' athletic dorm? His expression immediately darkened. His arm tightening around my waist, his tone a little dangerous. So, you still like younger guys, do you? Am I too old for you now, The alarms were blaring in my head, so I quickly leaned in, wrapping my arms around his neck and planting a kiss on his cheek. Young guys are nothing compared to Professor Derek. He looked at me, his gaze deepening behind his glasses. A smirk appeared as he held me close, one hand removing his glasses. By now, this small gesture was like a countdown. Without his glasses, Derek's eyes narrowed slightly, adding a hint of raw sensuality. He looked at me like a predator eyeing his prey, and my knees went weak. His kisses were intense, urgent, and a little possessive. Don't even think about anyone else. I held onto his waist, smiling. All I want is to fall asleep on Professor Derek's abs and slide down his nose like a playground slide. Everything felt perfect, and we ended up staying up late. With my last ounce of energy, I picked up my phone and texted my best friend, I'm going to be working with Derek. Extra story, as Professor Derek's students, everyone knew better than to take up his time after class. He'd always say, I have to go home to cook for my wife. Later, it became, I have to pick up my daughter from school. In their third year of marriage, Sunny became pregnant. It was a challenging twin pregnancy, and she needed an early C-section. On the day of the delivery, Derek waited anxiously outside the operating room, brushing away tears of worry. He admitted he couldn't imagine how he'd go on if anything happened to Sunny. The moment the operating room doors opened, he rushed in and grabbed her hand. Does it hurt? He asked softly. I don't feel much right now, Sunny replied, then added, where are the babies? Are they boys or girls? Derek looked momentarily lost, shaking his head. I didn't notice. Sunny couldn't help but smile. Derek, you look like such a fool right now. Sunny had given birth to a boy and a girl. Both absolutely adorable. Seeing how much Sunny had gone through during the pregnancy and recovery, Derek's heart ached, and he couldn't bear the thought of her going through it again, so he decided to get a vasectomy. The twins had completely different personalities. The older brother was quiet and could spend the entire day with one toy. The younger sister was lively, always chasing after cats and dogs, a little tomboy. But Derek was a complete pushover for his daughter, one little pout, and he'd forget all his principles. When it was time for the kids to start preschool, dropping off his daughter became a daily ordeal. The little girl would cling to him, crying as if the world were ending, refusing to let go. In the end, Sunny had to steel herself and hand their daughter over to the teacher. "Honey, I feel terrible when she cries like that." Sunny just rolled her eyes. "Kids always cry when they start school, she'll be fine." But the entire day, Derek couldn't focus, his mind filled with her little cries. Finally, during a break, he snuck over to the preschool for a peek. And what did he find? His little girl had already become the class leader, ruling over her own little kingdom. When it came to raising their kids, Derek and Sunny had a few differences of opinion. Sunny believed in encouraging the kids to develop interests and to learn. Derek preferred a more relaxed approach, letting them choose their own interests and explore the world. Sunny teased him, "Aren't you worried people will call your daughter a tomboy?" Derek pulled her into his arms, with a smile. "When I was young, teachers would always compare their kids, and you know what your dad would say?" Sunny looked at him, curious. "What did he say?" "He'd say, 'My daughter is an angel, the sweetest, kindest child there is. All I want is for her to grow up healthy.'" Derek continued, "I don't need my kids to follow in my footsteps. As long as they grow up healthy, kind, and with integrity, I'm happy." After all, parents are often the best teachers for their children. Both of their children turned out to be exceptional. One was steady and studious, following in his father's footsteps and immersing himself in research. The other was bright and outgoing, passionate about art since childhood, eventually becoming a renowned designer. In interviews, they both mentioned their parents, saying that the lifelong love between their mom and dad was the best family lesson they could have ever received. Through the years, Derek guided his students over countless academic hurdles, dedicating himself fully to his field. He achieved countless honors over his career, and in one interview, he said, "The person I owe the most to in my life is my wife. She gave me a home, gave me 2 beautiful children. She slowly filled the emptiness I once felt, piece by piece. Her warmth and kindness healed my life." Back then, his world had revolved only around study and work. But as time passed, he found himself looking forward to coming home, thinking about what meal to make for her, reminding her to stay away from cold drinks, planning their next vacation, and choosing gifts and surprises for special days. People remarked that Professor Derek had changed, he laughed more often. Yes, he'd been healed by the angel who had once given him a piece of candy. His home was filled with laughter. And he looked forward to every tomorrow. Even years later, the girl he loved still clung to his arm like a child, often looking up at him to ask, "Derek, do you love me?" Not one for sweet words, he always believed his answer would take a lifetime to prove. When their children had grown and started families of their own, Derek held Sunny's hand and gazed at her face. Sunny asked him if she looked old. He shook his head and said, "Sunny, you're just as beautiful as you were when we were young." No matter her age, she still made his heart race. It was as though they'd spent their whole lives in love. Even though they were no longer young, her eyes were as bright and clear as ever. Sunny said, "Thank you for giving me a life of peace and happiness." She always said she was blessed. Doted on by her parents in her early years and cherished by her husband ever since. Her life had been simple, smooth, and full of happiness. In his final moments, Derek was still reading one of his students' reports. Sunny sat by his bedside, reading him a poem. "How many loved your moments of glad grace, loved your beauty with love false or true? But one man loved the pilgrim soul in you, and loved the sorrows of your changing face." Years ago, she'd first been drawn to that handsome face. But as time went on, she discovered so much more in him that made his looks seem almost trivial. In the end, Derek held her hand, wanting to say something, but he could no longer speak. Sunny smiled, gently removed his glasses, and kissed him softly. "I know, Derek," she whispered. "I love you too." The end.